Welcome everyone to the IAPP web conference latest research findings on the state of CCPA and GDPR privacy rights compliance, sponsored today by CYTRIO. My name is Selena Lefebvre, a programming and speaker coordinator here at the IAPP. I'll be your host for today's program. We'll be getting started with the presentation in just a minute, but before we do, a few program details. Participating in today's web conference will automatically provide IAPP certified privacy professionals who are the named registrants with 1 CPE credit. Others who are listening in can apply for those credits through an easy-to-use online form on our website. I also want to let you know that a recording of this program will be available in your My IAPP, My Purchases, and My Recordings portal within 48 hours. Please feel free to post any questions you have for the panelists in the Q&A area at the bottom of the screen throughout the program for a designated Q&A portion for the last 10 to 15 minutes. And now on to our program, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Vijay Bassani. Vijay is the founder and CEO of CYTRIO. As a serial entrepreneur, Vijay has a track record of building successful companies focused on solving critical business challenges in the data privacy and security industries. Thank you so much for joining us today, Vijay. I'd also like to introduce our next panelist, Anjay LaGougle. Anjali brings over 20 years of security and data privacy experience to the panel. In her current role as the Product Security Officer and Data Privacy Governance Specialist for Cisco's Customer Experience Organization, Anjali specializes in data governance and cyber privacy issues. Next on the panel we have is Jim Rutt. Jim is the Chief Information and Chief Security Officer for the Dana Foundation. As an accomplished IT professional, Jim brings a lot of experience in leveraging technology to help reduce operational inefficiencies and improve business processes. And to round out on our panel today, we are joined by Cameron Huntley. Cameron is an attorney at VZN Law in Los Angeles, California, who works with his clients to better understand the necessary requirements for data privacy regulations. Thanks for joining us today, Cameron. And with that, I will now hand it over to our panelists.
Great. Thank you, Selena. So before we go to the panel, first 20 minutes we will take to review the research findings that CYTRIO has conducted over the last several months. To start off with, we'll start with how and what the state of CCPA was as of end of last year. Just to give you folks some insight into this, we basically researched about 5,200 companies end of last year, and we bucketized those companies into three buckets by reviewing their privacy policies and how these companies were responding to privacy requests. And the three buckets are companies that are using a commercial solution. We call them a compliant automation solution bucket. Second bucket is companies that clearly understand that they need to comply with CCPA, but they have chosen a manual processes such as email or 800 number to submit the privacy request. And the third bucket is non-compliant, because these companies clearly state that they need to comply with CCPA, but they do not provide any mechanism for a consumer to submit the data requests. So we have primarily three buckets here. So as of end of last year, as you can see here, around 11% of the companies were implementing or have implemented an automation solution, a commercial solution out there. About 45% of them are using manual processes and 44% were non-compliant. And if you look at the data as of end of Q1 of this year, as of end of last week, basically, we have added another 1,570 companies to a total of 6,745. And the data points are pretty similar. Now, if you see similar little differences out there, I would probably put them under the margin of error. So we are seeing the consistent pattern here of about 11% of the companies or 10% of the companies using automation solutions, and about 80% or 89% or 90% of the companies using either manual or doing nothing out there, right? So if I go into the next slide, it basically gives you a side-by-side comparison of Q1 versus end of last year. Again, don't put too much emphasis on the bottom chart out here, but the takeaway from this data is that companies continue to implement commercial solutions, even though the percentage is around 10% out there. Increasing number of companies are deploying commercial solutions, as well as we also see a little uptick in the non-compliant bucket. We'll probably seek the panelists' help here when we go to the panel discussion to help us understand that our assumption at CYTRIO is that due to some delays in CCPA final regulatory text, we are probably seeing some hesitancy or some delay in some companies adopting CCPA compliant solutions. So the next chart, what we'll do is we'll now dive into the statewide compliance. And if you look at that, top 3 states under CCPA, companies that are in these states, top 3 states are California, New York, and Texas. They comprise about 31% of the total companies that were in that pool of 5,200 companies that we looked at end of last year, right? And compared to that, you will see that there is an interesting trend here. As of end of Q1, the total of 6,745 companies, about 24% of the companies were in that from the top 3 states. What it tells us is that more and more companies from other states are catching up with CCPA, which is a good trend, which is what we want to see as privacy practitioners. The next slide, we basically dove into state by state analysis of the top 3 states. So California, right now, as of end of last quarter, we are almost up to 1,100 companies that we reviewed and researched. And the percentage is consistent with what we have seen as of end of last year. You'll see the similar pattern in New York as well as in Texas. Interestingly, Texas companies, one takeaway from this chart is Texas companies tend to be laggards in terms of implementing commercial solutions, even though they understand clearly that they need to comply with CCPA. Okay. Next, we dove into vertical slicing of this information. And the top 3 verticals, which are business services, retail, and finance, constituted about 54% of the companies that we researched in 2021. Compared to that, the similar percentage held true even in Q1, as of end of Q1 of this year. As of end of March, the top 3 verticals remain the same. And the percentage that these 3 verticals constitute out of the total pool of 6,745 remain the same at 54%. Next, we dove into the business specific, the top 3 vertical specific analysis. You will see again, the overall compliance automation within business services is staying consistent at around 7%, which is still again within the margin of error. And the non-compliant bucket has gone up a little bit. And again, as I said earlier, it probably might be due to the delays in the final text publication of CPRA. Okay. Similarly, under retail bucket, the compliance automation percentage is remaining consistent out there. And interestingly, you see a much lower percentage compared to other verticals with regard to non-compliant bucket. And the next slide is about finance industry. We were kind of surprised, but it can also be explained by the fact that finance industry comes under GLBA and FFIEC and other finance-related regulations. So you probably would see a little bit lower automation and compliance in this sector, but it is still consistent with what we have seen as of end of last year. Next, we dove into breaking it down by B2C versus B2B. Overall, you'll see there is almost a 50-50 division between B2B and B2C. And consistently, we have seen the percentage automation and compliance also staying consistent, whether it be B2B or B2C. So in B2B, we were at about 11% end of last year. And end of Q1 this year, we are still about 10.5%, which is again still within the margin of error. And when you come to the B2B, end of last year, compliance automation solution adoption was about 10%. And end of Q1, that's about 9%. The overall number of companies in the research pool is now up to 3,000 odd in the B2B bucket. Okay. Then we slice the data by the number of employees in the company. The first bucket was 100 to 1,000 employee companies. And there you'll see, again, about 10% adoption of automation solutions and about 42-43% in the what we call manual bucket, as non-compliant is about 47% here. Similarly, under the 1,000+ employee bucket, We see again a consistent pattern here, about 10% for automation solutions. Manual processes about 42%, and 47% of the companies are non-compliant in this bucket.